G'day poker people, welcome back. I waited 6 days from my previous session before I went back to Derby Lane to grind some 1-3 on a Saturday afternoon. Really happy with my results so far in the challenge, and today is a bit of a turning point. There's so much to get to in this session, so I really don't want to waste any more time and get straight into the gambling. So we are in the mix, and you need to ask how much for. It's 1,000 bangers where we play this first interesting hand, which happens to be a double bollard bomb pot. Let's go. Love these bloody things. Let's gamble. I'm in the cutoff with Jack 10 offsuit. And then we see two different flops, and they're pretty decent ones for our hands. We flop an open-ended straight draw on the first one and the second nut flush draw on the second board. So when the action checks through to me, I think this might be a good spot to stab in late position. I mean, it's always going to be pretty dicey bluffing into 7 different people, but I think we have a hand that is going to benefit a lot from folding out any ranges I possibly can and getting this hand a bit more short-handed, because if we do turn the nuts on either board, I would rather have less people to value bet / semi-bluff against type thing. So I go ahead and make it 45, and then I get called by a tight aggressive button and a passive low jack. So we go 3 ways to 2 different turns. The first one's a 6 of clubs, the second one's a 5 of hearts. Neither is any help to us. When the low jack checks it over to me, I think this is a pretty good spot to give up on my bluff. I think the chances that either of the opponents has a strong hand on either board is very likely, and just bluffing into 2 different people with jack high, not the best. I think we should check here and try to draw for as cheap as possible. It's not what I did in game. Apparently I woke up and chose violence this morning before coming in. I go ahead and bet 200, just really trying to maximize fold equity. I think this is too loose into 2 people though, so I do regret this play in all honesty. Whatever the case, I made it 200, and then I only get called by the button. So happy to fold out one person. Fingers and toes crossed that we get there on at least one of the rivers, because that is going to make our life a lot better. The first board is the 3 of diamonds, so it's a diamond on the wrong board, and the second board is the 2 of spades, so we completely whiff on both boards. Now I think we have a pretty interesting decision. Look, I really think I should have checked on the turn, so part of me just wants to check back here. I think the button actually has a fair few full houses on the second board, particularly anything with pocket pairs or ace high. I don't really think that they would try and raise those hands, figuring that they got that board locked up and they have a bit of showdown value on the first board, so they would want to keep my bluffs in. So we are going to run into the nuts occasionally if we continue to barrel here. Having said that though, I think there is some merit to bluffing, just in case my opponent has the Queen of Diamonds and an offsuit card for their second card, and that's a hand that's going to call twice and then probably fold on the river when they really only have a second pair on the first board and queen high on the second board. So I think maybe we should consider a small bet here, something like 200, to try and bluff them off of a queen X. But in game, I decide to check it. I'm catching up to where I should have been on the turn and just giving up with this one. I check it, and then the villain checks back really quickly, which is pretty gross because we know exactly what that means. I end up showing my jack 10, and then the villain does show Queen of Diamonds, 2 of spades. So pretty tilting to see the one hand that we would have been able to get my opponent off of, even with a smaller bet, and not the hottest start to the session. Fortunately though, the session just started and we've got the whole rest of the thing to turn it around. So we're playing 6-handed, and I'm in the under the gun position with a 6 of diamonds. I raise it up to 15 using my larger open size at a more call happy table, and I do get called by a passive cutoff and passive big blind. So we go 3 ways to a flop of jack 8-6 with 2 diamonds. I will take the nut flush draw with a pair, thank you very much. When the big blind checks it over to me, just going to check this hand. We have a smidge of showdown value with a 6, so we don't really need to overinflate it, and drawing for cheap and trying to call all of my opponent's worst flushes would be pretty sweet. So I check it, the cutoff checks, and then we do get a free turn, which is the 9 of diamonds. We make the ace high flush. Maybe we are running good today. When the big blind checks it over to me, I go ahead and do this thing called value betting. I make it 30, and then I only get called by the big blind. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 3 of hearts, and then things get interesting because the big blind actually leads out for 50. Now I think the big blind is going to have 2 different types of hands in his range. I think most of his range is probably just going to be missed straight draws or flush draws that they're just stabbing at it with, fearing that they don't have any showdown value. And the other part of their range is going to be slow plays, slow played flushes, slow played sets. Nothing made 2 pair on this river, so I don't think it's like they're just going to have 9-3 here. But I do think their range is going to be super weak or super strong, so when we have the well, it's not actually the nuts, but the effective nuts here. I think we want to use a large raise size in case we got really lucky and my opponent is on the stronger part of their range. So I raise it up to 420, blaze it the perfect meme raise size, and then the opponent snap folds. It's very likely that they did have one of the bluffing parts of their range. I just wonder if they did have a strong hand, would have they called this bet? So very mixed in terms of how I'm playing so far, and well, you be the judge of how I play this next hand. So there's a passive low jack who cold opens to 25. No straddle, no limp. They just absolutely bomb it pre-flop. And my read on this player is that they're doing this because they have an extremely strong hand here. So when the action folds to my button and I peel pocket nines, look, I don't really like any of the options in this spot. It's very, very seldom that I like calling open raises this large. I figure either you're going to make more EV by 3-betting these large opens because they're doing it too loose, or just folding because they're doing it too tight. I think this might be the one exception though, because I have the button and I have a hand where if I do hit my set, I'm probably going to be able to stack my opponent's overpairs most of the time. So this might be the one spot where I deviate from the 3-bet or fold versing massive opens, and I do just throw in the call here, and then the tight aggressive big blind calls as well. We're 3-ways to a flop of 10-8-7 with 2 diamonds, so we don't hit a set, but we do have the open-ended straight draw. The big blind checks it over the low jack, who goes ahead and c-bets for 80, so they actually overbet the pot, and I'm even more thoroughly convinced that they do have an overpair. Don't want to fold though, even though I'm very certain I'm behind, just because I think if I hit my straight or set, the chances that I stack the villain are very likely, and the villain's doing a good job of trying to price us out, but they're not going to be able to do it when I am playing this pot in position this deep. So I throw in the call, and then we get some bad news because the big blind rips it all in for 300. The low jack calls the 300 pretty quickly, and this is a really gross spot. I actually think I might be drawing to a chop because I think the big blind is going to have a straight here, at least sometimes. Also going to have 2 pairs and sets as well, which we are live against, but I think maybe it's just a prudent spot to fold getting this price. I do throw in the call, figuring that I'm going to be able to get the villain's stack if I do hit my straight or set, the low jack stack to be specific, but yeah, might be a bit too thin for this price. I do throw in the call though, maybe like a discipline there. Whatever the case, we are heads up to a turn, fingers and toes crossed that we get there. The turn is the Queen of Hearts. We do not get there on that card, and then to my slight surprise, the villain actually checks it over to me. I think in this spot we have a slam dunk check back. I still think my opponent probably has all of the aces and kings combinations. Even if they turn to set, I don't necessarily think they're always going to bet it. So really just checking it, hoping to draw for as cheap as possible. And then we get that free river, which is the 3 diamonds. We do not get there on that river. The villain checks it over to me now, and the front door flush draw getting in would be a scare card for a lot of their overpairs, and particularly pocket jacks. I think they're going to have a very tough time calling off with on this river, but I can't be bluffing in this spot just because even if I do successfully bluff the low jack, I still have to worry about the big blind having a stronger hand than me, and I think pretty much all of their range is hand stronger than me, so there's really no incentive to bluff here. So I do just check it back, and then we get to see what the villains had. The big blind had 8-7 of clubs, so he flopped 2 paired, did crack the villain's overpair. And then we get to see what low jack had, and he did have pocket jacks. So there you go. That's kind of the worst overpair for him to have because he blocks some of our outs, plus it would make our set outs dirty. So yeah, definitely not in love with how I played this hand. Yeah, just not playing the best today so far, in all honesty. So trying to get the session back on track in this next one. There's 3 open limps before I'm in the big blind with 9-8 of hearts. I decide to ISO it up to 40, probably a little bit too loose with this hand. I don't mind it if I think I'm going to get a lot of folds from the villains, but even if we only get 1/4 caller, we're going to have to play this hand out of position. So pretty dicey spot. Whatever the case though, I make a probably 2 aggressive raise here and make it 40, and then I do get a caller, but only 1 caller from a loose aggressive low jack. So we go heads up to a flop of 7-6-5 with 2 clubs and 1 heart. I take it back, very, very happy I raised this hand up now that I've flopped the nuts. Out of position on a board that's really good for my villain's range, I think we probably want to go ahead and check this hand, looking to mix in the check raise, build a pot against my opponents, hands that are 7x or stronger. So I check it over to them, they go ahead and bet 50. Now we have the most no-brainer check raise in the world here. I think my opponent is going to have a bunch of different 2-pair plus combinations on this board, and we're just trying to shovel money in when we do have the nuts. I go ahead and make it 150. Maybe raising something larger than 200 would be a better raise size. Whatever the case though, I make it 150 here. And then the low jack actually gives an exasperated sigh, which is a great sign because that is a very strong thing for them to do. They make an exasperated sigh and then they slam down a 350 bet. Now, the exasperated sigh and the big bet kind of makes me think that they do have the nuts as well. So, very decent chance we are chopping here. Hopefully not getting 3-year-old, but not going to fold. If my read is wrong and they're just overvaluing a set massively, they could have that hand as well. So, I just rip it all in here, expecting to get no folds. And then they do end up throwing in the call. And then I show my hand, and then the villain says, I need the board to pair. So there you go. They did have a set. And we've got the live run out here. And the turn is the 4 of hearts. So now we have a flush draw to go with our open-ended straight draw. Just hoping the board does not pair on the river. And then the river is the 6 of clubs. That's a board pair in river, and then the villain does show pocket sevens. So cop a little bit of a bad beat here, and not unhappy with how I played the hand on the flop. Just, yeah, the aggressive open pre-flop sort of max haunting us by the river, and we do end up getting stacked here. It was after this hand where I briefly considered leaving the game. I'd only been playing about 3 hours, but clearly things are not going my way this session, and I'm definitely not playing my A game. So I considered leaving, but then I thought, you know what? I might as well play a little bit longer. I mean, am I really going to drive all this way only to play 3 hours? Which I understand feeling that way in the moment, but I really think if you notice yourself not playing well and then something like a bad beat is sort of nudging you closer towards the tilt zone, probably is a good time to leave the session, just lick your wounds and come back another day. I didn't do that though. We kept playing for actually a lot more hours, but we'll get into that in the next hand. So perhaps not surprisingly, the villain who won the previous hand did end up doing a hit and runner about 15 minutes later, leaving us short-handed. We've got about 5 people in this next hand where I'm under the gun with pocket nines. I raise it up to 15, still at a call happy table, and then I do get called by the 2 players who have position on me, the cutoff and the bottom. So we go 3 ways to a flop of 6-5-3 with 2 spades. Pretty decent flop for pocket nines, but being out of position to 2 different people. I think I'm going to want to check most of my range here and see what develops, get information from the other players. So I check it over to the cutoff who goes ahead and bets 20, and the button throws in the call. Now that the action's on me, I think this is probably one of the better overpairs to mix in a check raise with. We're going to benefit so much from equity denial, and if we're going to get any value from this hand, this is probably the best street to do it before overcards come to scare off my opponent's pocket 8s or 6x combinations. So I go ahead and check raise it to 110. And then both the villains call, which I'm not in love with, to be honest. So we are still 3 ways to a turn, which is the 6 of clubs, probably one of the worst turn cards. I mean, there's a bunch of bad turn cards for pocket nines here, but now that the top pair has paired, I just go ahead and check it over to the villains. Then the cutoff goes ahead and bets 200. The button folds, and I make what I think is a pretty easy fold at this point. I think it's extremely likely the opponent does have a 6x combination with this line that they've taken, particularly betting into 2 people. So I do make what I think is a pretty easy fold, and then the cutoff was actually kind enough to show us the 6 of diamonds. So even though things are not going my way this session, I do like that I was able to make a disciplined laydown on the turn here at least. Next hand up, we've got the under the gun straddle on, and I know, because it's me, the tables all agreed to do it. I promise I didn't aggressively influence it. That will be against the challenge rules, but if other people ask for the under the gun straddle to be on, I'm definitely not going to say no. Whatever the case, the passive button opens for 20, and then I peel king queen offsuit. I throw in the call, which isn't a massive punt or anything like that, but I do think 3-betting is probably a better play than just calling versus passive villain here. Whatever the case, I do throw in the call, and then we're heads up to a flop of king jack jack rainbow. I'll take that, thank you very much. Check it over to the villain in flow, and they go ahead and bet 50. So they actually overbet the pot, which I was really surprised to see. I don't think the villain would ever do this with a jack. Maybe they would do it with ace, king, or aces, although it seems like a really weird bet sizing to take. I think most of their range is going to be bluffs or like trying to deny equity with pocket nines or something here. So I do throw in the call, and then off to a turn, which is the 4 of clubs. Check it over to the villain in flow, and then they check back, and then we see a river, which is the 4 of diamonds. Now the action's back on me. Definitely want to go ahead and value bet here. I think my opponent's going to have a lot of showdown hands like ace high stuff, pocket 9s, pocket 10s, and I'm just trying to think of the maximum bet that they'll call. I go ahead and make it 75, which I think is probably just a little bit too large. Maybe betting something like 60 would be a bit better. Maybe we're just splitting hairs over $15 here. Whatever the case, I make it 75. Then the button thinks a little bit before throwing in the call. You love to see it. I end up showing my hand, and then the villain shows ace 4 of spades. So yeah, going a runner with the bad beat versus that hand, and it was a run out where I was actually going to get max punished. So clearly I'm not running the hottest today. Next hand up, we've still got the strata line, you love to see it, and there's 2 limpers before I'm the cutoff with pocket kings. Let's see if things turn around with a premium this session. I raise it up to 35 and then both limpers call. So we're 3 ways to a flop of Jack 10-7 rainbow. Under the gun checks it to the passive low jack who leads out for 50. Now the action's on me, and I think we have a pretty clear-cut call here. I mean, sure, a raise could get called by worse hands on this board for sure. But having said that, being that we are getting to play the turn in position, and there's still the under the gun player left to act who just naturally checked it in flow, I think we're going to gain more by seeing what they do than we would by raising in this spot. So I throw in the call, and then the under the gun player does fold. So we're heads up to a turn, which is the jack of diamonds pairing top pair, which we do not love to see. I think the villain's going to have plenty of jacks in their range, and then they keep betting. They go ahead and make it 75. And now, yeah, I am somewhat concerned about the jacks in my opponent's range, but I still think it's likely that they do have a bunch of different straight draws on this board. Even stuff like a 10 or pocket 9s or pocket 8s that has slight showdown value that they're just trying to get the most from draws with. I think tracks pretty consistently with them using a smaller bet size here. So can't be going anywhere with my pocket kings just yet. I do throw in the call, and then we get to see a river, which is the 10 of diamonds. Definitely not the best river in the world. I think my opponent is going to have some 10x in their range. Plus, if they do have a worse value / protection bet like pocket 9s or pocket 8s, they're not going to continue to bet those hands for thin value or be able to call a bet from us themselves. They don't check it though. They keep betting. They go ahead and make it 100. Now, I think this is a pretty gross spot because I think we lose to all the villain's value range at this point, since I highly doubt they're going to limp call with pocket queens pre-flop. So we're essentially bluff catching if we do decide to call here. We're getting a great price to do so. I guess they could be bluffing with a missed draw, but honestly, I think it's much more likely they do have a 10. I don't really think they have a flop straight. I think they would have used larger bet size earlier in the hand. So yeah, essentially they have a 10 or a bluff, and being that we're getting this good of a price to bluff catch, I don't think I can be folding my kings here. I do throw in the call, and then the villain shows ace 10 of spades. So there you go. Copping another bad beat on the river. I'm definitely not running well this session. So at this point, the table's given up on the under the gun straddles, unfortunately. We do have a button straddle this hand though, which is a nice consolation, I suppose. So we see 2 limps before a passive low jack raises it up to 20, and then I'm in the cutoff with pocket 3s. And look, I think I should be playing 3-bet or fold in this spot. I think it's very unlikely that the low jack has a super strong hand when he raises so small over 2 limpers out of position to the button straddle. So if I'm going to play this hand, I should be 3-betting it, but even with that in mind, I think pocket 3s should just be a fold here. Don't want to 3-bet this hand. There's way better hands I would 3-bet bluff with in this spot. Apparently we're seeing things not going my way starting to tilt me and affect my play a bit, because I do throw in the call here, which I think is actually significantly bad, in all honesty. Not a great spot to set mine, in my opinion, particularly out of position to the straddle. Whatever the case though, I do throw in the call, and then there's 3 different callers, so a total of 5 ways to a flop of 5-3 deuce with 2 diamonds. I take it back. Absolutely love the fishy play pre-flop. Now, the blinds check it over to the low jack who leads out for 40. The action's on me here, and I think we have a pretty clear-cut raise spot. There's going to be so many worse hands that the villain who led out can call a raise with. Sometimes we're going to run into a straight, but I think it's worthwhile that to get value from all of the opponents' overpairs who aren't going to fold on this straight, flush draws, straight draws, etc. So I go ahead and raise it up to 120, and then only the low jack leader calls. So it heads up to a turn, which is the 7 of clubs, and then the low jack leads out for 120. I guess it's possible that they did turn pocket 7s. Them using a smaller lead size here, I think it's much more likely that they do have a flush draw or a straight that's trying to set its own price. So with that in mind, we definitely don't want those hands to get there for cheap. So I think with this SPR, we have a pretty clear all-in decision. So that's what I do. I rip it all in for 660, and then the low jack is in the tank probably a good minute or so before eventually showing me 5-4 of spades, and then they say, I'm going to let you have this one, buddy. So they fold their hand. So not able to get full value with the set here, although I don't think there was much more value to get against that hand in particular, and maybe things are starting to turn around in the session. Let's go. So maybe things are turning around and we've got a button straight 11 for this hand, and then a passive under the gun player raises it to 15. When the action folds to my hijack, I definitely want to be 3-betting that raise very aggressively. I think it's very unlikely they have a premium when they raise so small out of position. So when I peel king queen offsuit, it's definitely strong enough. I go ahead and 3-bet it up to 50, and then what do you know, I get 3 different callers. So pretty surprising that we're going 4 ways in a 3-bet pot, but welcome to Derpy Lane, I suppose. Anyway, the flop is 9-7-4 with 2 hearts. When the action checks to me, I just go ahead and check it. I think both the cutoff and the button are going to have a bunch of pocket pairs better than the 9s in their range, and I just don't want to bluff into strong ranges, particularly multi-way. So I check it. Then they check as well, so we do get a free turn, which is the king of hearts. Let's go. Not only giving us top pair, but the second nut flush draw as well. So when the action checks to me this time, want to mix in a bit of a bet. If we are going to get value from a hand like pocket 10s with a heart, this is probably going to be the best straight to do it on. So I go ahead and make it 75, and then only the passive cutoff calls. So we are heads up to a river, which is the 5 of spades. Now, part of me wants to bet like really small to still try and get value from pocket 10s that checked on the flop, but I think it might be a bit too thin. Maybe that hand would just bet on the flop themselves, and yeah, it's just starting to feel a bit thin, particularly since I think the villain might have ace king pure in their range, being that they called a 3-bet pre-flop. I mean, 1-3 players love doing that. So I check it over to them. Then they do go ahead and bet 200, and as I mentioned, very worried I lose to ace king here. Plus, like, a set of 9s wouldn't be totally impossible to check the flop because they have the board so locked up and they just want people to catch up to them. Nut flush, also not totally out of the realm of possibility, although it's a bit harder with us having the queen of hearts. I don't know if they're cold calling a 3-bet with like ace 5 and ace 8 of hearts, for example. So yeah, just more worried about the ace king and really don't want to pay them off. So I make what I think is a pretty disciplined laydown here with my king queen. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. So despite a little bit of resurgence in the past few hands, this session really hadn't been going my way, and I was definitely 100% on tilt. I could tell by just the way my body felt. Some of the plays I were making were pretty poor, and I think the biggest thing that was indicative of me being on tilt is I actually ended up staying many more hours in the hand after I copped that bad beat with the 9-8. I actually ended up playing about 14 and a half hours before we got into this next hand. It was actually playing so long my phone battery died and I couldn't record this hand at the table, but I got into a game that was really good. There was a fun action player who we played this next hand against, and it made me not want to leave. And part of that is because, yeah, the game's good. You want to play when the game's good, but part of it is just absolute tilt monkey, me trying to chase my losses, degenerate gambling style, just absolutely really, really poor habits to do as a poker player. Like, you should not be emotionally attached to the results of an individual session, so chasing results is just absolute degenerate. And I really hate that I fell into that trap in this one, and I did play such a long session, but we were about 14 and a half hours into it when we played this next hand. So whatever the case, the fun action player opens the cut off to 50. No straddle, no limps. They open it to 50, and they've been doing this pretty much every hand, to be honest. And I've just been waiting for a strong hand to 3-bet them with. They get called by a tight aggressive button, and then when I'm in the small blind with pocket jacks, finally overhand, I can 3-bet up for value. I go ahead and make it 300, and then the action player calls and the button folds. So we are heads up to a flop of ace queen 3 all spades. This is not a good board for red pocket jacks, so I just go ahead and check it over to the villain, who checks back, which we're pretty happy to see. And then the turn is kind of good, kind of bad, because it's a jack of spades. So we do hit our set, but now, like, we lose to any spade at all. So I don't think we can bet and get called by a worse hand, particularly when he checks on the flop. So I just check it over to him, and then he looks at his cards, like, very obviously, before going ahead and betting 300. And when he looks at his cards, like, straight up, I don't think he's trying to level me at all. I think he was just checking to make sure he had a spade and then he wasn't betting as a bluff here, which is pretty sick because we kind of have to call this bet, because I think we're going to get, if we do make a full house on the river, we probably are going to be able to stack the opponent, who is not the type that is going to fold a flush on the river even when the board does pair. So we kind of have to call this bet, but it's really gross because the vast majority of the time we're just going to brick and the opponent's going to get value from us with like a 5-high flush. So it feels pretty gross, but I do throw in the call. Fingers and toes crossed that we're board pairs on the river, and then the river is the two of diamonds. So there's not a board pair. I check it over to the villain, and then the villain's in the tank. They look at their cards again about 3 times, and about 60 seconds later, they do end up checking back. I show my pocket jacks, fully expecting to lose, and then the villain looks at his cards and he slams down ace-5 offsuit with the 5 of spades. He was absolutely over the moon. He got so much value with his 5 high flush, and yeah, I mean, I was already on tilt this session, but watching him do the big celebration after getting me for max value just really grinded my gears, put me in the dirt, and yeah, I did end up playing like another 45 minutes at this table, but then the fun player who had honestly had more than his fair share of alcoholic beverages ended up getting in a fight with someone, and the game ended up breaking before I could even get close to chasing those losses. Not that that's the thing I should be aiming to do anyway, by the way, but yeah, this session was just absolutely abysmal. There you have it. Those were the most interesting hands I played across this absolute mammoth 15-hour and 40-minute session. I'm almost embarrassed to admit how long I played in this session, especially considering it was all just me being on tilt and playing longer than I should have, trying to chase losses, absolute degeneracy. So I am very, very tempted to give myself an F grade for just attacking my poker sessions with that type of mentality. I'm going to go with an E grade instead, only because I actually do think I made a lot of good plays throughout the day. Don't get me wrong, plenty of tilt, plenty of big mistakes this session, but by the end of it, when I was in a game with an action player who I just had to wait to have a hand against, I think I did a good job of just sitting around and waiting for an absolute monster. It never ended up coming, unfortunately, but I did a good job of just waiting it out and trying to wait for something, which I think, like, you don't want to play 15-hour sessions, but when you do, you want it to be in a game that's, like, about as simple as that one is. So naturally, as you probably expected, I had a massive loss on this session. Actually, my biggest 1-3 loss I've ever had, over $2,100. And you better believe that is absolutely going to hurt my win rate in this challenge. I go well below $60 an hour, well below $40 an hour actually at that. So we have a lot of ground to catch up on after this absolute mammoth punt of a session. And yeah, I need to be so careful about just playing while I'm tilted. I can leave a session early, that's fine, after I cop a bad beat if I start to feel tilt. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all, but just playing super long when I am tilt is going to be completely counterproductive towards my goal of making $60 an hour playing 1-3. I need to be putting in volume, but it needs to be quality volume as well. So yeah, overall very disappointed with this session, and the challenge is I'm a dog now. I'm working from behind to try and catch up to that $60 an hour, which hasn't been the case ever since the first session, I think was lost. Ever since the second session, I just haven't gone back in the hole from where I want to be. So a lot of work to make up. Make sure you hit subscribe and you'll get the next session where we come roaring back, trying to fight to get that win rate back up. For now though, I'm out of here. Nika Min.